Welcome to Freaked Out with your co-host, Liz and Landen.
What's up, everybody?
I had seen somewhere that people were celebrating Christmas in July, which in my opinion is devastating.
Absolutely. In case you guys did not know, Liz is not a fan of Christmas. Neither am I. We are not fans of Christmas.
I wouldn't say not a fan. I just prefer a haunted Christmas, and I absolutely adore Grinch prior to him giving the gifts back.
I am definitely into haunted, spooky, that kind of stuff. So, Nightmare Before Christmas, one of my favorites.
Fuck yeah. And I could be a Grinch at Christmas. Bah humbug. I own it though. Speaking of Christmas, since people are bringing it up in the month of July, we might as well bring up Halloween. Spooky, creepy. Love this time of year. I wish Halloween was just something that started the moment summer was over and existed until December 24th. Then I would be a happy camper. And then I would allow Christmas into my heart because Christmas is celebrated for 2 fucking months and it drives me nuts. I hate hearing Christmas music. I hate hearing Mariah Carey. I do not want Mariah Carey for Christmas. It's almost like a cult-related song nowadays.
Definitely, they play it all the time, and I feel like it's actually longer than 2 months. I feel like they start it right now in July and go all the way until Christmas and forget about all the other holidays. But maybe the Illuminati is the reason why she put that song out.
I would not be surprised. I used to love that song as a child, and then I grew up and I realized I hated Mariah Carey. Anyway, moving on to our episode, we will be covering Murder Room 1046 today.
Now, this is an older case, but a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Wanted to give a shout out to all of our patrons and all of our listeners. We truly love you guys and appreciate you guys. You are exactly why we continue to keep doing this. So thank you for being here. Now, don't forget, guys, you can follow us on our YouTube channel as well, which is Freaked Out Inc. We'll be heading into our new home very soon, so you'll expect to see some really cool content that we have coming. We are also making that studio. And a lot of you guys provided us with a bunch of memorabilia, and you'll get to see those in the episodes. So keep an eye out for that.
Oh my God, I'm so stinking excited. All right, well, let's get started.
On January 5th of 1935, a man who had given his name as Roland T. Wilson, later identified as Artemis Ogletree, died at a hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, from being beaten and stabbed.
Now, prior to his death, he had done a 2-day stay in room 1046 at the Hotel President. The staff at the hotel indicated that there was unusual behavior and incidents noted before Artemis, aka Roland, was found wounded in his room in the morning of his death.
There was no next of kin that could be located, leading to suspicions that his name was an alias. His body was stored in a local funeral parlor for almost 2 months. A planned burial in the city's Potter's Field was averted when an anonymous donor provided funds for a funeral and a floral arrangement signed by the name Louise.
I was gonna put this right out here very early. I believe this Louise is in fact the murderer, just based upon this unusual situation. But that's just my feeling on the matter, but let's continue to carry on.
The man's true identity remained unknown for a year and a half until Ruby Ogletree, an Alabama woman who had seen a photo of a distinctive scar on his head in the news, and then she identified him as her son, Artemis.
She said that he had left Birmingham in 1934 and at the age of 17 to hitchhike to California, which I do believe is accurate, so I don't believe she's telling a lie there.
Later, she received 2 letters, reportedly from him, some as far away as Egypt. In August of 1935, a caller claiming to be from Memphis, Tennessee, told her that Artemis was in Cairo. The letter had also been sent after Artemis's death. Records kept by shipping companies found no records that Ogletree had gone to Egypt. No other suspect has ever been identified.
And this is why I think a woman was involved in this, because when men kill, they kind of keep trophies. They may go back to the location where they killed somebody, but with women, They don't really leave loose ends, so they create elaborate stories to continue to obsessions to carry on.
The letters later were used to link the killings to a 1937 murder in New York, but no charges were filed against the man arrested in that case, one of whose alias had been Donald Kelso. The FBI later investigated but was unable to produce any new leads.
I was going to say that this was a ruse to connect it to another case to throw the police off, but in reality, I don't think the police were close to knowing anything.
Now we are going to talk about the details that we know leading up to the case, and let's see what Liz can come up with based upon these details, and they are very small details that were given.
I'm ready.
Now, early on the afternoon of January 2nd, 1935, Artemis walked into the hotel president and asked for an interior room several floors up, giving his name as Roland T. Owen, with the Los Angeles address. Staff remembered him as he dressed well and wearing a dark overcoat, and he brought no bags with him.
Interestingly enough, Artemis shows me that he was meeting someone. I believe that he had already met this woman previously, but she also had his bags, so he no longer, had bags to bring up. She was actually going to bring them to him later.
Artemis paid for one night. The staff noted that in addition to the visible scar on the temple, he had a cauliflower ear, and concluded that was probably a boxer or professional wrestler. They believed him to be in his early 20s.
How about this? I do not believe as though he was a wrestler or a boxer, or maybe perhaps street fighting for money. He was trying to get out, though. He did plan to travel, like going to Cairo and places like that. He wanted to travel all over the world and was trying to get himself financially stable so he can get there.
Randolph Prosp, a bellhop, accompanied Artemis up to the elevator and up to the 10th floor. On the way, Artemis told him that he had spent the previous night at the nearby hotel but found the $5, $100 in current dollars nightly rate too high.
Yeah, I believe the hotel he had spent the night at was not as close as he suggested it to be, but I'm also seeing that there was like where he had spent the evening where the woman was, and also he did not have his bags or clothing with him there, so makes sense.
Which, why would you need a bellhop if you don't have any bags? But that's okay.
Right?
Now, Randolph opened room 1046, which per the guest's request was on the inside, overlooking the hotel's courtyard rather than the street outside. He watched as Artemis took a hairbrush, comb, and toothpaste from his overcoat pocket, and that was the extent of his unpacking.
He had to look good for the lady, right? Although I do not believe that Randolph saw, but I also see that he had some gum and was chewing on that as well. He shows me that there was a pocket watch, which he may have been looking at as well.
After Artemis put those items above the sink, he and Randolph left the room. The bellboy returned to lock it and gave Artemis the key. After returning to the lobby, he saw that Artemis left the hotel.
Now, from what I gather, he was, again, going to meet this lady. He shows me a description of her. I can tell you she was definitely a looker. Long blonde hair. She paid attention to her looks very much so. She wore a rather risky type of heel. She definitely enjoyed wearing red lipstick, red dress, a red bag, red shoes. She was someone who wore red everything, at least in front of him. She had like a red hat on too. Now, from what I gather, the two of them met in their travels. This woman was definitely married to someone else, but running away from her problems. At least that's what she told Artemis. Now, from what I gather, the two of them were planning to grab some food before checking into a hotel and having a rather sinful night.
Not a fan of red. Now, back in the 30s, definitely risque, but also not as uncommon as people would like to think.
Definitely as much as the people in the 30s thought that they were like immune to sexual deviancy. They were not, though. That's why a lot of people had like 20 to 30 kids.
Exactly. Now, the same day that he had checked in, Mary Soptic, one of the hotel maids, returned from the day off to work in the afternoon. She went to room 1046 and was surprised to find arrangements there, since the previous night a woman had been in that room. She apologized but said she had to go ahead and clean the room.
Yeah, it's interesting about this situation. Although this took place, the maid would have known, I don't know, based upon a schedule? I don't know. I just feel like you don't just go into rooms. So I find the situation a little unusual from the beginning. I know accidents happen, but I don't know. I'm too convinced that there's something connected to this maid.
And what do you think is connected?
I'm seeing that he saw her in the hallway and asked her to help him tidy up the room a bit.
She claims that while she did, she noticed that he had the shades drawn and left only one dim lamp on. He was either worried about something or afraid. In addition to this preference for low light, she told police later, after she had been cleaning for a few minutes, Artemis put his overcoat on and brushed his hair. He then left, but asked her to leave the room unlocked as he was expecting some friends in a few minutes.
Now, from what I gather, he had gone to lunch with a woman and came back. She told him she was going to come back in the room and he was patiently waiting for her. I don't believe he was scared. I don't believe he had panic. He was just someone who didn't like a lot of light. Plus, they were about to get it on, so he wanted to make sure it was as romantic as possible.
Mary did as he asked, and at 4 p.m. she returned to the room with freshly laundered towels. Inside the room was dark. She saw Artemis laying on the bed, fully dressed. Visible in the light from the hallway was a note on the bedside table that read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait."
Like, you remember that much? Like, you're paying attention that hard? I don't know. Something seems extremely suspicious about Mary. Although I do believe she did bring the laundry and the towel. I do believe she saw him laying on the bed. I even believe that there was a note. But why in the hell did she read it? That's none of her business.
Do you believe Mary has some sort of connection or involvement to this?
I really do believe that Mary is not the perpetrator or the murderer. But I do believe that Mary made some shit up and was paid off by the woman that did kill him. Hire a woman to do another woman's job. I don't necessarily believe he was sleeping on the bed either. I feel like the woman, told her to say these things.
Interesting. Now, which would make sense? She miraculously read this note because she was told to read it.
Exactly. And they had this whole, elaborate story after the fact, but we're going to talk about that next.
Now, January 3rd, the next morning, Mary returned to room 1046 around 10:30 a.m. The door was locked, which led her to assume that Artemis was out, since it can only be locked from the outside. But when she opened it with her own key, sitting in the dark where he had been the previous afternoon, the phone rang and he answered it. "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast. No, I'm not hungry." Still holding the phone, Artemis asked Soptic about her job as she cleaned. He wanted to know if she was responsible for the entire floor and if the president was residential.
I believe the two of them had definitely had conversation about rates and her cleaning job and yada yada yada. I don't necessarily believe she overheard this conversation or remembered the details of it. I do believe there was more to the conversation that took place as well, but I'm also feeling as though the name was not Dawn, perhaps Donna?
Now he repeated his complaint about the other hotel's exuberant rates, after which she finished cleaning, and then she left. And again at 4 p.m., Mary returned with fresh towels. Inside room 1046, she could hear two men talking. So she knocked. A voice she described as loud and deep, probably not Artemis, asked who it was. She responded that she had brought fresh towels, to which the voice said, "We don't need any." Yet Mary knew there were no towels in the room, as she had taken them herself this morning.
I don't believe that there was another man's voice. I do believe, if anything, it was Artemis that made that statement. I'm also believing that she did come back with a fresh set of towels, but I'm also sensing he may have asked another maid that was not doing this specific floor for some towels, and I think she got them for him.
2 hours later, Jean Owen of Lee's Summit near Kansas City checked into the president after having shopped in the city for a few hours. Feeling sick, she had decided not to drive back home that night. She was given room 1048. Her boyfriend, who worked in a flower shop in the city, came to visit her there at 9:20 p.m. He stayed for 2 hours, and later that night, she told police she heard men and women talking loudly and profanely all over the floor.
Yeah, I believe all this information is completely accurate. The two men were fighting heavily from what Artemis shows me. It's almost like foreplay for them. She was aggressive, fighting they were drunk, having a good time, but I don't believe it was like genuine fighting. I believe they were just, rolling around and then saying dirty things in the hallways and then heading back to the room.
Jean was not the only person to note unusual late-night activity on the president's 10th floor. Elevator operator Charles Blocker, who began his shift at midnight, reported later that he was fairly busy until 1:30 a.m. After that time, most of the hotel quieted down for the night, except for a loud party in room 1055.
It's interesting that there was a party happening in 1055. Something just keeps tingling to me. Maybe she found someone else there. Maybe she left the room going to 1055 to enjoy the festivities. Maybe that's how she met this maid. I'm not exactly sure, but there's something to me that this party had something to do or some sort of association with this situation.
Charles recalled one visitor in particular, a woman he had seen at the hotel visiting male guests in their rooms on other occasions, and thus believed to be a prostitute, a conclusion shared by other hotel staff who were familiar with her. She came in first, sometimes during his first 3 hours. He took her to the 10th floor, where he asked about room 1026. 5 minutes later, the elevator was summoned there again. It turned out to be the same woman, who expressed puzzlement that her client was not in room 1046, since he had called her on a previous visit with him and had always been present. She wondered if in fact he was in 1024, since she could see through the room's window that the light was on in there. She remained on the floor after the conversation.
I do not feel as though the prostitute was the same woman that was supposed to go to his room. She definitely messed up on the number where she was supposed to go. Also, from what I gather, this prostitute was not as financially secure as the woman I'm seeing. The woman I'm seeing had money, and lots of it.
Now, a half hour later, Charles got another signal to take the elevator back to the 10th floor. The woman was waiting again, and he took her down to the lobby. An hour later, he took her and a different man to the 9th floor, and at 4:15 a.m., a call from that floor turned out to be the woman he took there to the lobby, and she left the hotel for the night. Another call to the 9th floor at 15 minutes later turned out to be the man who had come up with her. He told Blocker he could not sleep and was going out for a walk.
I mean, yeah, she was being spread around the whole hotel, clearly. So much chaos going on, but I really don't feel like any of these people were involved in what happened in 1046, but a very active night on a Thursday.
Absolutely. Now, there was also another possible encounter outside. He may not have been at the hotel earlier that night at 11 p.m. Robert Lane, a city worker driving on the 13th Street near Lyda Avenue, saw a man dressed in an undershirt, pants, and shoes, ran into his path, and flagged him down. When Lane stopped, the man apologized, saying he had mistaken Lane's car for a taxi.
I don't want to put too much focus on this person. I don't believe this was Artemis. I believe this was somebody who came from the party in the other room. I feel like he was completely belligerently drunk. And after Artemis's death, Lane went in to view the body, and he saw the same scratch on the arm and went to police, telling them he believed that, this was in fact the man he picked up. But again, I don't think so.
At 7 a.m., a new switchboard operator, Della Ferguson, came on shift. She was preparing to make a wake-up call to room 1046, when she noticed a light indicating the phone there was off the hook. Randolph, who had led Artemis there 2 days earlier, was on shift again and drew the assignment. The door to room 1046 was locked, with a Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the doorknob. After several loud knocks, a voice from inside the room told him to enter. However, he could not, as the door had been locked. The same voice told him, after another knock, to turn the lights on, but he still could not enter. Finally, Randolph just shouted through the door to hang the phone up, and he left.
From what I gather, I do believe that Artemis was trying to contact the police directly because of his injuries, not capable of speaking properly. And because he really couldn't communicate through the door, he was trying. Randolph just was not able to assist him, unfortunately.
Randolph told Ferguson that the guest in room 1046 was probably drunk and should wait another hour. At 8:30 a.m., the phone had still not been hung up. Another bellboy, Harold Pike, was sent to the 10th floor. The do not disturb sign was still on the door, and it was still locked, but Pike had the key to let himself in. Inside, he found Artemis in the dark, laying on the bed naked, apparently drunk. The light from the hallway showed some dark spots on the bedding, but rather than turn on the room light, Pike went to the telephone stand, where he saw the phone had been knocked to the floor. He put it back on the stand, replacing the handset.
He was knocked out at this point, or at least unconscious, bleeding. He wasn't really able to communicate. I don't believe Harold noticed any blood. He was definitely not drunk at this point. Also a little disturbed by seeing a naked man just laying there, so he tried his hardest to avoid looking in that direction.
Shortly after 10:30 a.m., another operator reported that the phones in room 1046 was once again off the hook. Again, Props was sent to the room to see what was going on. The do not disturb sign remained on the knob. This time he had a key, and after his knock drew no response, he opened the door and found Artemis on his knees and 2 feet away from his elbows, and his head was bloodied. Props turned on the light and put the phone back on the hook, and then noticed blood on the walls of both the main room and the bathroom, as well as the bed itself.
I believe that the phone was knocked off the cradle yet again because Artemis was, again, trying to call the police or let somebody from the front lobby know what was going on. Unfortunately, due to his injuries, he's not able to comprehend or complete the task. I see that he was yelling and screaming for help, but in reality only sounded a little bit above a whisper, and he was in and out of consciousness, trying to get himself out of the hotel room into the hallway, but was not successful.
Randolph went downstairs immediately for help. He returned with the assistant manager, but when they did, they could only open the door 6 inches as Artemis had the intern fallen on the floor. Eventually, Artemis got up, and when the 2 hotel employees were able to enter the room, he went and sat on the edge of the bathtub. The assistant manager called the police, where they were joined by Dr. Harold Flanders of Kansas City General Hospital.
He was trying his absolute hardest to push himself through this troubling situation, and I really believe it was just moments before death, like one last hurrah, without realizing how bad his injuries were. Adrenaline, kind of freaky.
Artemis had been bound with a cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His neck had further bruising, suggesting someone had been attempting to strangle him. He had been stabbed more than once in the chest above the heart. One of these wounds had punctured his lung. Blows to his head had left him with a skull fracture on the right side. In addition to the blood Randolph had seen, there was some additional spatter on the ceiling.
Now, from what I gather, this woman was interested in very rough sex play, and she wanted to tie him up and take control, and he was a willing participant, but unfortunately things got excessive. She beat the living shit out of him, stabbed him, really just fucked with him real bad, and she thought he was dead, so she left. Now, before all this transpired, she had seen the maid Mary, paid her off a nice amount of money. I don't know if it was before or after. This was an intentional murder, like she is planning to kill him. I see that she gave her like $50, which in reality is like what, like 5,500, something like that here. Anyway, she told her not to say a word and give specific instructions, and the woman decided to cover for her. She gave the woman, an illusion that she was running away from an abusive relationship, and found out later that that was not the case, and felt rather guilty, but never came forward to share the woman's secret.
Dr. Flanders cut the cords from Artemis' wrists and asked him who had done this to him. Nobody, Artemis answered. When asked what had caused these injuries, he said he had fallen and hit his head on the bathtub. While you were stabbed, man?
Like, right?
The doctor asked if he had been trying to kill himself. After saying no, Artemis lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital. He was completely in a comatose by the time he arrived and died shortly after midnight on January 5th.
Honestly, who the hell is going to admit to having some sort of rough sex and then being tied up and then beaten by a woman, He would sooner die, and that's exactly what happened. Given a little bit more of a backstory here, this woman has done this many times over. Many different men. From what I gather, she's like a scorned woman, married to some man who has a lot of money, like a monopoly guy. A tycoon, yes. He cheated on her all the time, and I think he died at some point along the lines. I don't believe she killed him. She was traumatized by everything he had put her through, though. He beat her constantly, tied her up, and, well, she was getting men back. She snapped. She tied Artemis up, and she did this. She vowed to hurt as many cheating men as she could. Now, this is the interesting part. I see that Artemis was not married. He didn't have a wife. He didn't even have a girlfriend. But she thought he did. He made it seem like he did. I think she was married, so she kind of gave that illusion. So he was like, yeah, I'm married too, man. And unfortunately, he was kind of like murdered, but he wasn't even the type of person she was looking to kill. She was pretty bipolar. The first night they had spent together, it was not sexual. The two of them had communicated, talked, and then it's almost like something snapped in her head. And then she went into full-blown panic mode, murdering poor Artemis.
How many other men has she killed like this?
At least a dozen. He was not the first victim, nor was he her last. I'd say he was probably like third or fourth victim at this point.
Now, where did she go after this?
New York? She had money, and I keep seeing her traveling back to New York. I feel like that's where she was actually from.
Now, why did Artemis have these aliases?
From what I gather, Donna had suggested for him to come up with his alias because it turned out like, I don't know, Donna's also her alias. She was married to a man in some sort of cereal business, and I believe it was connected to maybe Wheaties, which is connected to Washburn Crosby Company, which I believe is one of those famous families. And I think she was like the second or third wife, and he was like really fucking old. I also believe the name Roland T. Owen was connected to her. I still can't figure out how. If I do figure it out, I'll let you know. But I'm also getting like a tingling sensation that her real name was actually Sarah.
Very interesting episode we had here today. I know that room was called the Murder Room, but was there something that happened that the hotel is now called Hilton President?
I mean, if we ever try to contact Artemis in a bigger way, we need to go to this hotel because he's there. There's also like extensions, like he goes to look for this woman in Buffalo, New York. He has a huge connection to like Buffalo as well. I don't feel as though he was, obviously the target. This woman picked him from a crowd and honestly was going to kill him one way or another. So him playing along that he was married only just made matters worse for him.
Interesting. Always nice to have some details, especially from my own hometown. Until next time, guys, stay freaked out.